הנה בא השלום, הוא יצא לבדו ששלום, ורוד וגרב כל יום, הנה בא השלום, הוא אלוף הגזמים,
Good afternoon. I'm Izzy Tapuchi, the President and CEO of Birthright Israel Foundation, and it is a pleasure to be with you today, albeit virtual. We hope that everyone is staying safe and well, and we look forward to when we can once again meet together in person. Thank you again for your generosity and continued support of Birthright Israel Foundation in 2020, and for joining us for this special conversation with Natan Sharansky and Professor Troy. As you know, we made the difficult decision to postpone Birthright Israel trips beginning in March 2020 due to the COVID-19. More than 35,000 eager participants had their Birthright Israel plans put on hold. Despite this pause in our program, however, you, our supporters, did not postpone your generosity. Your dedication to our mission did not stop. I would like to take a moment to say a few words about our dear friend Sheldon Adelson, Zichrono Livracha. Sheldon was a giant among the Jewish people, dedicating his time and his fortune to better our community and our homeland. All of the many organizations he supported, but we know that Birthright Israel was extraordinarily close to his heart. The loss of Sheldon is a great one for the Jewish people, the state of Israel, and Birthright Israel. May his memory serve as a blessing and an inspiration to us all. We wish his beloved wife Miri a long life and much comfort. It is fitting that today we celebrate the holiday of Tu B'Shvat, which marks the beginning of the season in Israel in which the earliest blooming trees begin to bear fruit. Many commemorate the day by planting trees as a symbol of renewed growth of the Jewish people. Tu B'Shvat is a symbol of hope and renewal, and what better way to celebrate a story of hope than to hear today of a great Jewish hero of our time, Natan Sharansky. We also are fortunate to have with us Gil Troy, whose long-time involvement in Birthright Israel has had a tremendous impact on our educational work. Gil's commitment to help foster Jewish identity has helped hundreds of thousands of young Jewish adults grow and bloom. Before we hear from Natan and Gil, I am first pleased to welcome and introduce Birthright Israel Foundation board member, the only one, Doug Ross, to say a few words. Doug, over to you.
Thanks, Izzy, very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, I'm Doug Ross. I chair Birthright Israel in Atlanta, and I also serve on the National Board of Directors of Birthright Israel Foundation. We are very fortunate to have with us today Natan Sharansky and Professor Gil Troy in conversation to discuss their book, Never Alone, Prison, Politics, and My People. I feel privileged to have the chance to introduce them both to you. In 1977, Natan Sharansky, a leading activist in the dissident movement in the Soviet Union and the movement for free Jewish emigration, was arrested by the KGB. He spent 9 years as a political prisoner, convicted of treason against the state. Every day, Mr. Sharansky fought for individual freedom in the face of overt tyranny, a struggle that would come to define the rest of his life. He went on to serve in 4 successive Israeli governments as minister and deputy prime minister, and later served as chairman of the executive of the Jewish Agency for Israel. In July 2019, he became chair of ISGAP, which is the Institute for the Study of Global Antisemitism and Policy. Gil Troy is a distinguished scholar in North American history at McGill University, an award-winning American presidential historian, and a leading Zionist activist. He is the author of several books and publications. Gil also serves as chairman of the Birthright Israel International Education Committee. I also want to let you know that there will be an opportunity to answer any questions that you may have toward the end of the conversation with Natan and Gil. At any time during the program, you may click on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen to type in any questions, which will be moderated by Diane Romarowski, who is Vice President for Principal Gifts at Birthright Israel Foundation. Please note that this call is off the record. Now I will pass things over and let the conversation begin. Thank you again so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Izzy. Thank you, one and all, for being on this call. You know, for me, Birthright, it's family. And I've had the privilege of meeting so many of you over the years, of working with you. And it's such a strange thing that this machine, this extraordinary gift to the Jewish people, has been frozen in place for so long since the start of COVID. But of course, on the inside, we know that it hasn't been. We've actually used this period to do a lot of brainstorming, to have very intensive conversations about where the education should be going, to note that it's now 20 years really since the start, and the Birthright participant of 20 years ago is not the Birthright participant of today, and to say, how do we update and how do we take advantage of this difficult moment? And I'm also happy to say that I have a very young friend who's here on a gap year who just completed a Birthright program, and she's been to Israel a gazillion times, and she'd already been in Israel for about 4 or 5 months, but nevertheless went on this program with her year course, Young Judea year course group, and had an amazing time. And of course, we know that the 2 words that are always used to describe Birthright are awesome. And that's why it's such a privilege to be a part of this Birthright family. And it's a privilege to, I'm not introducing Natan to you because so many of you also know him as a member of our extended family. You'll actually see just how deep the ties go in a moment. So today we're going to talk about our new book, Never Alone, which we wrote together. And the book describes, we call it a memoir festo or a manifestoir, kind of core ideas that Natan and I, despite coming from very different worlds, I was born in a world of freedom, he was born in the vast prison camp called the Soviet Union, agree on, but we use his life story to tell those stories and to push those ideas and to celebrate those ideas. And the book is organized 999 for the 9 years that he was in the Gulag, the Soviet prison system, the 9 years that he was in Israeli politics, and the 9 years that he was in the Jewish Agency. And we literally signed a book contract 999. But you can't have a book contract that's an inside joke. I also worried about my Christian friends, my evangelical friends who might hear 999 and think 666 the devil. I worried about my German friends who might hear 999 and think we're too negative. And we were trying to find a title, and I was sitting with a friend of mine, David Suissa, in Los Angeles, and he said, well, tell me about the book. And I said, well, you know, there are critical moments for 9 years when Natan is in the Gulag that he knows that the KGB is saying you're forgotten, you're abandoned, but he knew he was never alone. And he says, that's it. For 75 years, and we know that this is the International Holocaust Day, we've been focusing on never again. And of course, we revere the memory of our Holocaust martyrs. But now, and this is a central Birthright theme, we're not just anti-Semitic, we're not just anti-Zionist, we're giving a positive, affirmative vision of Jewish identity. And so indeed we are never alone. And when you're part of the Jewish people, you could be in the Gulag, you could be a first timer, getting this amazing gift from you and the Jewish people of 10 days in Israel, and you realize, wow, I'm never alone. So now, Natan, in the book, we talk about, you tell this very powerful story about how you've met hundreds, perhaps thousands of Birthright participants over the years. And you say that you often see in their eyes that same expression, that same experience that you and many of your fellow refuseniks had when you discovered your Jewish identity. Let's unpack that. Let's look at the 2 sides of that equation. So first, tell us a little bit about your revelation, your discovery of your identity, and then we'll look at what you see the Birthright participants experience.
Okay, well, I was born and grew in the Soviet Union, in Ukraine, in the city of Donetsk, which then was called Stalino. Today, Donetsk everybody knows because it is in the center of war between Ukraine and Russia. But then it was not really a famous city, and there was quite a lot of Jews, but there was absolutely nothing Jewish. Zero. No holidays, no traditions, no language, no religion, no place to learn it and to find out about it or to read about it. No Brit Milah, no Bar Mitzvah, but there was one very Jewish thing, it's antisemitism, a lot of antisemitism. And that's how you grew, understanding that you live under totalitarian regime, where you cannot publicly say what you really think about this regime, and you live without no identity. And so the only value is value of your career. And your parents say, because you're a Jew, you should be the best in your profession, because that's the way how we survive. And then in 1967, when Israel defeated its enemies, and suddenly Israel entered our life in a very powerful way, because everybody around you, anti-Semites and those who love you, but everybody look at you and say how you guys did it. And you understand, for them, you're connected to Israel. And you want to understand about this connection. And that's when I started reading in the underground about ourselves, in fact, about our history. And suddenly you say, oh my God, there is such a great history. It's not nothing to compare with Bolshevik revolution, with all these purges, with all this tyranny. Such a great history which begins from Exodus from Egypt and goes to this day, to the Exodus of modern times. And of Leon Uris, the book which was very popular. And you understand that these guys who are standing near the Western Wall, this famous picture, which also came like underground to us, they are 20 years old and they're participating in this history. And all these Jews who are coming from all over the world as tourists from Sydney and from Miami and from New York and from Toronto, they say, oh, my father is like yours from Odessa. We are relatives. We are family. We want to help you. So you discover that there is history, that there are people who say that they are family, and there is a country who is ready to send airplanes to the end of the world, but to help you. So, wow, that's discovery of identity. And that's when you really understand that that's what you want. You want to be part of it. And that's what gives you strength to start speaking on behalf of yourself, your right to be a Jew, on behalf of the other Jews, and on behalf of everybody, because you feel free, you value, it is something very valuable, and you want to speak freely your mind. So it's discovery, really sudden discovery of this history, of these people, of this country, that gave us strength to start this struggle. And that's what I really feel sometimes, that when I was from the very beginning as a lobbyist of birthrights, as a supporter of birthrights from the moment Charles Brown and Michael Steinhardt came with this looking like crazy idea in 97, 98 to Israeli government, and I was their voice in Israeli government. And then on all the stages with different Kohen, with different heads that I was having as a minister or as a head of Jewish agency, I met with many, many, many young people in birthrights, because it was really, then later, in a few years, it became that it's absolutely revolutionary idea that all the statistics, it's like life-changing experience. So what is so powerful among us or in Israel that makes such a big impact on their lives, of the statistics, of their future choices, of the way how they support their community, how they're members of the community, how they decide how to marry, how they decide whether to make aliyah in Israel, what changes their life in 10 days. And my feeling from discussing it that young people really suddenly discover that there is history in their being Jewish, and in Israel it's so easy to feel the roots, that there is very interesting, exciting family, people around you, and the state is something very different. It's so cool to be part of it. It's so interesting. So, of course, I don't compare this, us living under the totalitarian regime and discovering our Jewish identity against the will of the authorities And these young American Jews who are coming from their experience of their assimilation in America and rediscovering how it is exciting to be part of Jewish family. But I see a lot of similarities in the way how quickly, how suddenly, how abruptly this discovery changes your life.
So in a sense, the two names of Birthright are embedded in what you're saying, because Birthright is saying you belong, you're a part of this. You can have your identity stripped by Stalin and by the communists. You can have your identity sort of wither away simply by history, and yet you are part of this. And the Hebrew is not an actual translation. Taglit means revelation. And all of a sudden, when you realize you're a part of this, wow, you have this revelation. So let's talk about this revelation. You go a little deeper into this whole thing of Michael Steinhardt, Charles Bronfman come at you with this crazy idea. You're in the government. You know how much financial pressure the Israeli budget, especially at that time, is under. Why would you possibly get excited about this program? And why would the Israeli government invest in this thing that takes away money from the IDF, from the economy, from basic services? And you yourself had entered government to help Russian Olim. That's not part of your mandate to get involved.
Well, first of all, in all our struggle in the Soviet Union, it was clear that we cannot survive in one day. We are facing the most powerful totalitarian regime in the world, which killed already tens of millions of their own citizens in order to keep everybody under control. And here is a small group of dozens, hundreds, thousands of Jews who suddenly say, we really don't want to live here, we want to leave. Why KGB should not simply kill all of them? Because from the very first day, it became the struggle of all the Jews of the world. And I, as an activist and then a spokesman of our movement, I was on this bridge between us activists and all these Jews who were coming, who were bringing us information, who were smuggling our letters, our appeals to the leaders of the world, with whom we were calling by telephones which were disconnected or which were jammed. Nevertheless, these people were taking news about or information about us to their senators, to their congressmen, to their governments. They were organizing massive demonstrations. They forced their governments to link the interests of these governments with the policy of the Soviet Union. So I was in the middle of this, and I knew how this powerful, this connection between us, Jews, scattered all over the world, and the state of Israel, how much energy is inside. And that's why I did know when KGB was telling me that I'm alone, I knew that they're lying. Getting no information from the free world, I was sure that Jews of the world are fighting. And that's why when I came to Israel, I always felt that I'm equally connected to Israel and world Jewry. And that's why I was involved long before I started our own party. And before I became the minister in the government, I was always interested in the projects which connect, which build bridges between world Jewry and Israel. I believe that both sides are gaining a lot from this. And here I'm in the government. And here coming Charles Bronfman, whom I knew earlier because he was supporting different projects that we initiated for absorption of Soviet Jewry long before. And his late wife then was very active in struggle for Soviet Jewry in Montreal. So I knew him, and I knew less Michael Steinhardt, but also an important figure in Jewish community of New York. And they came with this crazy idea that let's give to every, from where it's birthright. This idea was simply, we want that in every community, when Jew is born in synagogue, it is declared that he has the birthright to go to Israel, and maybe even community will give him a check or on the ticket when he'll grow and become 18 years old to go to Israel. But looked very naive. But they were very serious, and they said, you know what? Before we want that the government also will be partner, but before we go to government, we want really to study this problem. And they created special center for studying this problem in Jerusalem. And I was like very actively, eagerly supporting it. When they had enough information to show that it can have a lasting impact on young Jews, they came to the government and they said, we want you to be the partners. And I remember I was in the government, but the reaction of the minister, of the most respectable ministers, I remember Minister of Finance and others, was, what, we Israelis will take the money of our taxpayers and will give to these rich American Jews in order they'll send for free their kids to Israel. That's anti-Zionism. Why we should be doing it? They have to give us money. So I had to amplify the voice of Charles and Michael again and again to the government meetings, explaining how it is important for us that they will become stronger Zionists. They'll have a strong connection to Israel. They'll be our big supporters. I don't know how it could finish, but in the end, there was one member of the government who understood it and who said, I agree. And he happened to be Prime Minister Netanyahu. And then there was this historical meeting of four of us, Bibi Netanyahu, myself, Steinhardt, and Bronfman, when this letter that government takes obligation to support this program was signed. And in the first years, it was a relatively small program. And the government had to give $4 or $5 million. But you know, every year there are some cuts. And the first thing that they want to cut is the money for birthrights, because it's not for the needs of Israelis. Why shouldn't we cut it? And so there was ongoing struggle until after some years, suddenly, they looked at the statistics, which had to say that Steinhardt and Bronfman were collecting and there was a special center for study of the effect of it in Brandeis University. And so they understand that it really makes people much more closer to Israel and makes them better Jews. And isn't our role? And of course, when Sheldon came, and Sheldon and Miri, and they simply really turned it into that dream which Charles and Michael had from the beginning, that every young Jew who wants should have this opportunity to go to Israel. And thank God, then I needed to continue my lobbying 4 or 5 years, but then it became so clear to everybody that that's a very important Jewish Zionist program, that the government really supported whatever the numbers were, the government was there.
So ironically, as the program became more expensive and a bigger part of the Israeli government budget, it faced less resistance because they saw the success.
Well, yeah, you cannot argue with such a success. After all, unfortunately, we know how many programs there are to strengthen Jewish identity, which don't work. And here it was proved that with every year, the proofs were stronger and stronger, that does work. Of course, it works only as, let's say, the first injection of this Zionism, the first injection of this desire to be part of your community. What will happen after, it's still a challenge. But suddenly, those who felt that nothing is working, nothing can make our children to be interested in their own Jewishness, suddenly found out there is a project which does work, which does make a difference. And so I was very happy then, after finishing my service in 4 different governments and being all the time the big supporter of birthrights, then to enter it from the other side, as a chairman of the Jewish Agency, which also has a very important role in this project.
So before we get to the Jewish Agency, I want to ask one more thing about this. It doesn't make sense, because every day we read, even in the Jewish newspapers, about how Israelis have given up on American Jewry, and American Jewry has given up on Israel. And yet you're saying the opposite. You're saying that there actually is this deep tie that binds. How explain that?
Yeah, well, that's how our book is about this. Because really, when I decided that I have to write this book, and when I invited you, and I was very happy that you agreed to be my co-author. When I am in this center of very difficult negotiations between American Jews and Israeli government about the Kotel and some other big disappointments, and Iran problem, and so many Israelis are, including leading Israelis, are angry on American Jewry that they're not fully supporting their efforts about Iran deal, and so many Jews diaspora are equally disappointed, and they have a right to be disappointed that Israeli government doesn't show sensitivity to their pluralist approach to Judaism. And with all these accusations that you're betraying our values or you're betraying our state and so on, I thought that after all, and everybody speaks about divorce and so on. So I have a unique perspective of looking at it from 9 years in prison. I'm looking at it from 9 years in the government when I saw how difficult it is for the government to put part of this budget or to put some of its power to diaspora Jewry, but how they were doing it with every day, year more and more and more. And I was on the part as a head of Jewish agency, I saw how with the most critical voices at the moment of need, or leaders of diaspora Jewry and Jews all over the world are mobilized, and how Israel is important to them. And that's why I thought that if you're looking from different directions simultaneously, you can see the real picture. And the real picture, no doubt, as we were describing it in this book, that we are becoming more and more dependent on one another. And then if before we were saying how we can save you, now we're saying how we can use you to save us. And both sides, in fact, have this feeling. And that's a very different type of relations. And the only thing which we need is, while shouting and shouting and shouting, from time to time to start listening to the other side. Not in order to agree, but in order to understand that, in fact, they want the same. We all want to continue our journey together through Jewish history.
So as so often happens, the headlines emphasize the differences. The headlines emphasize the yelling and screaming, but underlying it is this bedrock sense of Am Yisrael Chai, that we are united. And one of the things we point out in the book is that even the Soviet Jewish movement had a lot of differences, had a lot of ideological debates, had a lot of different organizations that many of you, I'm sure, were a part of. But nevertheless, there also was an overlying goal. And I think when we talk about partnership, which is one of the themes of the book, Birthright is also this beautiful partnership now involving the Israeli government, involving the federations and the Jewish Agency, and involving, of course, all of you, the philanthropists and the foundations, and the happy parents, the happy grandparents, the proud American Jews, Canadian Jews, South African Jews, British Jews who are making this miracle happen every single day. Now, I would like to talk about the birthright bounce. I started using that phrase when I first saw young students at McGill University who had been on Birthright and had no connection to Judaism, all of a sudden doing Shabbat dinner, taking leadership in the community, protesting when it was necessary for Israel. I call it Birthright bounce, the degree to which I and my family have benefited from our connection to Birthright. I call it the Birthright bounce when I see how grandparents and parents who had never been to Israel before, their kids go, and all of a sudden they say, hey, I can go too. And prior to COVID, American Jewry had gone from barely 25% of American Jews visiting Israel to over 50%. But you also brought another birthright bounce to the Jewish Agency, that much of your identity building work that you did with Birthright, you took on a larger scale with the Jewish Agency. Tell us a little bit about that as we start thinking about how to sum up this conversation.
Yes, Jewish Agency, in fact, it's happened so historical that Jewish Agency was existing as the government of Israel before Israel was created. And then when Israel was created, the chairman of Jewish Agency, Ben Gurion, became the prime minister of Israel. And Jewish Agency got a special mandate to deal with the aliyah and absorption. And so when I came to Jewish Agency, that was the criteria. Every shaliach, every head of the department, first of all, success or failure is checked by the way how many people he or she convinced to make aliyah, and how many alim came this year from this country or from that country. And of course, I'm fully for aliyah. I think that, Israel is the best place in the world. But I said, you know what? Look, what the history of saving Jews from Arab countries, from Holocaust, from Jews behind the Iron Curtain, is more or less belongs to the history. Of course, we still have Jews in Iran, some small groups in Yemen that I had the or no, more or less finishing this aliyah, and other groups which are under the attack. But mainly those who make aliyah make it as a result of their free choice. And what makes people to in this free choice? Their feeling of connectedness. They are proud of Jewish identity. And we at the same time want that people who support Israel. Well, who supports Israel? Those who feel connected. And we want them to fight whether against anti-Semitism and against assimilation. So all this, bottom line, all this comes from strong Jewish identity. So strengthening of Jewish identity, that has to be our aim. And look, what a great program is Birthright. What an important program is Masa, bringing young people for 1 year of studies here. Let's see how we can adjust these programs of Israeli experience for every Jew in the world. And I have to say, there were some powerful voices of the government who said that I'm changing the mandate. They have government gives such special mandate to Jewish agency because it is concerned about aliyah. But even now, are you minister of tourism? You want to bring more Jews, and then they'll go back? And it took time for people to understand that, in fact, strong Jewish communities, that's what makes Israel stronger. And that the more connected Jews to Israel and to their Jewish identity, the bigger will be aliyah and all the other things that we are interested in. So to switch this accent, to explain, we are not against aliyah, but in order to make aliyah bigger and in order to make Jewish people bigger, we have to deal with strengthening their identity. And there are two ways to strengthen Jewish identity: faith and Zionism, or your devotion to our tradition, or your devotion to the Jewish state. And that's my experience in all the Jewish communities in the world. If those who are connected to tradition and to Israel, they're the strongest. Those who have at least one of these connections, you can work on this. But those who don't have this or this, those who have no connection, neither to history nor to Israel, their grandchildren will not be Jewish. And that's true for France, it's true for America, it's true for Russia, for everyone. So I really switched the center of the Jewish agency activity, and it was a huge shift in two bureaucracies at the same time, Israeli bureaucracy and world Jewish bureaucracy, and huge financial problems. And it is very difficult to move things which are done for 30, 50 years in the same way. But I think this switch made Jewish agency much more relevant for today's world, and I'm glad that now Buzhe Herzog follows the same path.
So we have another Birthright bounce, which is that the themes of this call and the themes of Birthright are in many ways the themes of our book, which is identity building, which is about having a positive, affirmative vision, not being reactive, not being defensive, and celebrating the power of Jewish peoplehood, and understanding that at the end of the day, we're all captains of our own Jewish ships. We're all navigating our own Jewish journeys, but we also are deeply united by many core ideals and core values and a core vision that we don't want to give it up. We don't want to be the ones where the Jewish people die on our watch. We want to make sure that we continue, not for negative reasons, but for positive reasons, because it gives us so much satisfaction. It gives us so much inspiration. And with that, let us turn to Diane, who's going to lead the Q&A. So over to you, Diane.
Thanks so much. And thank you, Natan and Gil, for sharing some of your story with us. We have a couple of questions. Let me remind everyone there's about 120 people on this call. Please feel free to use your Q&A button, as Doug mentioned earlier, and we'll try to take as many questions as possible over the next few minutes. A first question. You spoke a little bit about the original idea of Birthright Israel really impacting diaspora Jewry. Can you speak a little bit to the impact on the young Israelis, the Mifgash, who have participated in the program and been such an important part of that entire integration of the trip?
I always believed that Mifgash, meeting between Israelis and diaspora Jews, have its advantages for both sides. And birthrights became one of the best proofs of it. Because if Jews from America, from France, from Russia, from other places are rediscovering or rediscovering their history, their country, their pride in having such a interesting center of Jewish people. Young Israelis, sometimes for the first time in their life, understand what it is to be Jew by choice. They are not born to be, they can decide, no, they're born, but they can decide every day whether to be part of it or not to be part of it. What it is, Jewish pluralism, that there are so many different ways in expressing your Judaism, and you're still part of the family. Something about, because of historical and other reasons, for most of Israelis didn't exist. They didn't understand it. What it is that, well, diaspora Jews discover this new generation, new type of Jew who feels responsible for all the history, for the country, who goes to serve in the army. But these Jews also, the Israelis discover what it is responsibility in the community. What it is that your community, you are part, you are minority in the big country, and how it is important that we all stick together, that we remember about our interests of the community, at the same time being concerned that the general surrounding of our community will be liberal, will be tolerant. It's very new topics for Israelis, but it makes the, I would say, feeling of responsibility for all the Jewish family much bigger, and they're becoming much more proud of that. Now we understand what it is meant that when we serve in Israeli army, we guarantee the future of all the Jews and not only of Israelis. So in fact, for many years historically, from Ben Gurion, there was attempts to turn Jews into Israelis. Now it is these Israelis are feeling themselves part of Jewish family, and that's something extremely important for strengthening our mutual identity.
If I could just add one line from the Education Committee perspective, when it started the Mifgash, the Israelis were really being used as props, as an opportunity for the American Jews or the Canadian Jews to meet Israelis. And over the years, we've seen how it's really become what Martin Buber called an I-thou relationship. And the Israelis themselves undergo, as Natan was saying, this profound relationship, this profound transformation. And we understand our educational responsibility to them as part of this family of 750,000 happy participants who have endured and experienced this amazing experience.
Thank you. Any other questions? Please put them in the Q&A. I'll throw up another one that we have. What do you think Israel and diaspora Jewry would look like today if Birthright Israel did not exist?
Well, I think that our connection would be weakened. After all, look, we all want that our family will be strong. And I can say from my work later in Jewish agency, who were those people who understood both sides? Or who were those people or the activism of whom I could rely when we have to fight anti-Semitism, when we have to defend Israel, when we have to fight assimilation? It's usually, it is those who went through kind of Israel experience programs. But with the time you have almost no young Jews who came here for a year, if they didn't come before for 3 months program or before for 10 days program. As a rule, in the last 20 years, almost all these Israel experience programs, almost all of them begin from birthrights. So definitely we would, that's on one hand. On the other hand, I can say that when 25 years ago, in the first government of Bibi Netanyahu, I was trying to organize kind of dialogue between non-Orthodox Jewish movements and Israeli politicians. It was practically impossible. The Israeli politicians didn't think that it is their problem. They didn't think that it has anything to do with Jewish people. That's for them. Let them talk about it in America. Now, in these days, there is such much more bigger understanding why it is our mutual problem, and to the great extent because there are tens of thousands of Israelis who went through this experience of Mefgash with birthrights, and they are our first allies in all this dialogue.
And we have the data to prove it, right? We just released this 20-year study, this longitudinal study, showing that by any criterion that you use to do Jewish, to say, what is it to be a good Jew or to live a fulfilling Jewish life? I don't like this language of good Jew, bad Jew. I like leading a fulfilling Jewish life. By any criterion, if you've been on Birthright, as opposed to not having been on Birthright, it makes a tremendous difference.
Thank you. So we all know that with COVID, our trips have been on pause. Just any thoughts that you have about the resumption of those trips and where we're going moving forward?
Gil?
So we in the Education Committee are ready. We're primed, and I know that Giddy Mark and our extraordinary CEO has been preparing the team. He's a true optimist. So he was back in August already ready for the first groups to come. And I think what'll be interesting is that when they do come back, they'll come to an even new and improved Birthright, as I was saying at the beginning. And you know, I think we're going to figure out creative ways to do this. If we need to do capsules, we'll do capsules. If we need to create, you know, opportunities for vaccinations first, we'll do vaccinations first. Always, 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 we knew in Birthright, I'm the education guy, right? But before you get to education, you have to get to logistics. And before you get to logistics, you have to get safety and security. And I'm so proud that over the 20 years that Birthright has been alive and kicking, 20 plus, safety and security has always taken the top priority. And we really are sitting on a legacy of great pride. And what we're seeing is a lot of other organizations are even now turning to us and saying, how are you going to do it? How are you going to get back into the game? And it'll be an opportunity to hopefully respond to all the pent up demand and benefit from all the generosity of everybody on the call to make sure that we can meet that demand, really in memory of, as Natan was saying, Sheldon and Mary Adelson, who understood their power, their jump into the Birthright game was when they bought up the waiting list. So that there would be no young Jew who wanted to go to Israel who wasn't able to go to Israel, because Sheldon's father had not been able to go to Israel because he simply couldn't afford it.
Thank you. I have one more question here. You speak with much welcome optimism about the relationship between Jews worldwide and the state of Israel. Still, what do you think is the biggest challenge that faces that relationship today?
Look, it's not rosy optimism. If you'll read our book, you'll see that we are speaking firsthand about very deep problems and conflicts. And there is one chapter which is called Kotel Fiasco. For 4 years, I was leading this on the request of Prime Minister negotiations, which finished successful and then turned into political fiasco. And we speak a lot about almost tragic feelings among Israeli leaders when American Jews, or many leading American Jews, didn't support position of Israel vis-a-vis Obama administration on Iran. And yes, unfortunately, I was there in the most conflicting moments and most dramatic moments of deep conflict. So our optimism is based not on the fact that we are ignoring it, but on the fact that in the end, if you look what was in the heads of those political leaders in Israel or those Jewish community leaders, well, how we can overcome this and stick and continue our journey together. How much we need them at this moment, even when we disagree with them. And that's why we're saying that there is a big potential to understand better one another and to make some steps, not to agree, but some steps how to continue our journey together. And we are speaking about them. So I think it's based not on our desire to run away from the reality, but on our going deeper into our conversation and understanding what's behind it. Gil, you want to say
We acknowledge that there are differences. We acknowledge that there are forces of divergence, but we also do indeed try to emphasize the convergence. Let's zero in on two issues very quickly. One is, of course, politically. I think that Israelis are far more concerned about Iran and the Iran deal than many American Jews, and that's a point of tension. There's still obviously a fallout from the love affair that some Israelis, not all Israelis, had with Donald Trump, and the disdain that so many American Jews had for Donald Trump. So there are political issues that are there. Second, there's a different style of being Jewish in Israel and of being Jewish in America. But that's the opportunity that we want to say to also learn from one another and not just finger point. And the broader opportunity, I think, is this, and this is definitely a theme of the book, where Natan talks about being in a punishment cell in prison and playing chess in his head and then turning the board around in the spirit of the Queen's Gambit. Turning the board around, at first you're black and then you're white. Learning to think about the other person. And I think we in the Jewish community, both within American Jewry and also between Israel and American Jewry, have an opportunity to model to the United States of America, to the rest of the world, how to agree and how to agree to disagree, and do it amicably, do it with respect, do it with an opportunity to learn from one another, not just judge one another.
So thank you both. I'm mindful of the time, and we have a few more questions, which unfortunately I don't think we're able to get to because we're going to continue with our program. But I really want to express the appreciation of everyone through their questions. It's my pleasure now to turn the program over to Laura Minskoff, who's going to share her Birthright Israel story with us.
Thank you, Diane, and thank you to both Mr. Sharansky and Professor Troy for being with us today to share your incredible story along with your experiences and unbelievable impact on Birthright Israel and Jews worldwide. So thank you for that. I am thrilled to be here virtually to share my story with all of you. And here it is. If you would have told me that seeing a rodent in Israel would change my life, I would have thought you were out of your mind. And yet it did. But first, let me tell you about the events that led up to that fateful hedgehog night. I grew up in Boise, Idaho, and as I'm sure you can imagine, not a lot of Jews there. I remember having strong Jewish identity, but it was compartmentalized. I have incredible, strong Jewish parents, but my environment wasn't really supportive of my being Jewish. I think a lot about this moment in elementary school. It was during the end of the year, my classmates and I were making holiday decorations to take home to our families, and each student got a coloring book with Christmas trees and all of these things in it. And I asked if I could get a Jewish one, like a dreidel, Hanukkah, something to bring home to mom and dad. And I remember my teacher looking at me and not knowing what that was. It was a small but impactful early example that in that classroom and city, I was different. As a child, different is often scary. So to not feel out of place, I learned to create different versions of Laura. There was class president Laura, homecoming queen Laura, soccer Laura, and Jewish Laura. Jewish Laura typically came out on Friday nights at services with my family and Sunday mornings when I went to religious school with a whopping 6 other kids. So that's how I lived my life, presenting different parts of me depending on what the scenario called for. And then I left Boise to attend my dream school at the University of Pennsylvania. Loved it so much, I went twice, first for my undergrad and later to attend Wharton for my MBA. Penn really was the first place that opened my eyes because in some capacity, it was the first time that I had been around so many other young Jews. I joined a Jewish sorority, had friends to go to Shabbat dinners with, not to mention friends who knew what Shabbat dinner was. I had so many people during that time, friends, classmates tell me that I had to go on Birthright Israel. It was overwhelming how many people had gone and raved about it. And so I knew I had to see what all the fuss was about for myself, and was so thrilled and grateful when I got accepted on my trip. Being extremely extroverted, as soon as we boarded our flight for Israel, I was making friends and chatting, literally the entire flight. Had I known how jam-packed the coming days would be, I might have taken a few minutes to nap, but the Birthright Israel experience truly started so up my alley. It was just go, go, go for the whole week. There was so much to see, experience, so many incredible connections to form. And from the moment we touched down and I heard the captain say, "Welcome home," I knew that for me, this would not just be a trip. It still makes me emotional. But it was when things began to slow down that it really hit me. We went into the Negev desert and it was just this completely different place. It was the first time in a long time that I had been able to be still and be quiet, which does not happen a lot in my life. And in the Negev, the Bedouins asked us to play soccer with them. So soccer Laura was ready to rock. And it was just incredible to play this sport that I love on the other side of the world with people who from the outside seemed so different than me. But when we played the sport I loved together, there was this sense of unity and togetherness. And in that place, I began to realize the profound sameness and connection that we all share. And then the hedgehog moment. On one of our last evenings, in the stillness and quiet of the night, I went on a walk with an Israeli soldier. He was pointing things out to me and telling me how to say them in Hebrew, probably laughing at my accent. Cat, dog, boy, girl, how to text I love you to my mom and dad. And then the cutest hedgehog runs past us on the path and we're both cracking up laughing as he points and yells, "Kipod." It's probably one of the Hebrew words I will never forget because it's so imprinted in my mind. And in this silly hedgehog moment, I realized something so amazing in that it was entirely unamazing. By that, I mean, as magical as Israel is, how incredible that week had been. It's not some far off, unrelatable place that despite long flights and newspaper headlines apart, it's not only her monuments, her grand history, her deep complexities that make Israel matter to us. It's her people, falafel, that Israel is another place filled with cities and towns, housing young and old, boys who go on walks with girls. And it's a place that I can see myself in, a place where parks have their squirrels or hedgehogs, just like anywhere else. And as small and simple as that moment was, it was huge for me. I got to see the beauty in the normalcy of Israel. Israel became a place for me that I can't just go and visit once. It was the first place where I could be completely myself. No versions of Laura, just one. And it made me feel like I was at home. Connecting with the people I met on Birthright Israel showed me that we are more alike than we are different. Even a girl from Boise, Idaho, can foster a connection to Israel. When I got back to the States, I wanted to find a way to keep that connection and that energy alive and feeling that bond to Israel, because I now cared in a whole new way. And instead of compartmentalizing my Jewish identity, I finally wanted to bring it to the forefront of who I am. Sounds like a perfect definition of what Professor Troy was calling the birthright bounce. I just found out today that that's definitely me. I decided at that time to walk away from a job at Teach for America and go work for AIPAC in Washington, DC. And nothing ever felt more right to me. I naturally now have Jewish colleagues, Jewish friends, do Jewish philanthropy, and realized how much more fulfilled my life feels because of all of that. Over the past 2 years, I have founded a women's empowerment company and expanded my work with women to coaching female executives and founders. My work helps women take agency over their lives, advocate for themselves, and be more assertive by being the captains of our ships. This isn't just my company or what I do during the day. This is how I do Tikkun Olam. And it's how I honor my mission and lessons that were learned on my Birthright Israel trip. My deeply rooted belief that anyone and any place can go from underdog to strength if we stand together and lift one another up. Birthright Israel allows for Jews from all over the country, literally, to have their own hedgehog moment. Your generous commitments to the Birthright Israel Foundation are so powerful. They help people like me move from making Judaism a compartment of our lives to making it a foundation, learning that we can be all ourselves, even extroverted soccer-playing Jewish women from Idaho. In other words, thank you for helping me find my purpose and for welcoming me home. Thank you for sitting in the captain's seat for the Jewish people and advocating for each of us. We don't have to wait for someone else to save us when we have people like you who commit your time and resources to the Birthright Israel Foundation, so Jews like me can transform our lives and hopefully others' futures. Have a lovely afternoon and happy Tu B'Shvat.